I got my best friend a job at my company. I trusted him, supported him, considered him a brother. And he, in gratitude, stole my idea, turned me into management, and got a promotion at my expense. He thought he had outplayed me. But his mistake cost him everything. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of my corner office at Nexus Technologies. I took a moment to savor the view of San Francisco's skyline before turning to the prototype on my desk, a system optimization algorithm that could revolutionize how our company handled data processing. 3 years of late nights had gone into this project, and I was just weeks away from the final presentation to the board. My phone buzzed. It was Ben. Again. Morning, Alex. Coffee before the team meeting? Ben Marshall and I had been inseparable since 3rd grade in suburban Chicago. We'd built tree houses together, survived high school together, and even attended MIT as roommates. When I landed a position at Nexus right after graduation, Ben had been genuinely happy for me. "You deserve it, man," he'd said, clapping me on the back. But life hadn't been as kind to Ben. A family medical emergency forced him to drop out during our final semester. He eventually finished his degree at a state school, but the prestige wasn't the same. For years, he bounced between startups that inevitably folded, his resume becoming a graveyard of failed ventures. 6 months ago, he'd called me, his voice uncharacteristically small. "They're laying off everyone, Alex. I don't know what I'm going to do." I didn't hesitate. "Let me talk to my director. We have an opening in the development team." It hadn't been easy. I'd put my reputation on the line, personally vouched for Ben's abilities, and spent countless lunch breaks helping him understand our systems. But seeing my oldest friend regain his confidence had been worth it. "Sure," I texted back. Usual spot in 15. At Equinox Coffee, Ben was already waiting, 2 steaming cups on the table. "You're a lifesaver," I said, grabbing mine. "Presentations in 3 weeks and I'm still tweaking the load balancing protocols." Ben leaned forward, eyes bright with interest. "The optimization project? How's it coming along?" I pulled out my tablet and showed him the latest benchmarks. "See this? 42% faster processing with 17% less server load. If we implement this company-wide, we're looking at saving millions in infrastructure costs." "That's incredible, Alex." His expression was all admiration. "Mind if I take a look at how you structured the back end? Purely academic, might help with what I'm doing in customer analytics." I hesitated for only a second before typing in my password. Ben was family. We'd shared everything since we were kids. "Just don't tell Johnson I'm showing you this," I laughed. "Technically, it's still classified until the board presentation." "Your secret's safe with me," Ben said, eyes scanning the code. "Always has been." For the next few weeks, Ben became my sounding board. He'd stop by my office almost daily, asking thoughtful questions about implementation strategies, suggesting minor improvements, offering to test components. I appreciated his enthusiasm. It reminded me of our college days, staying up all night to crack impossible coding problems. "You know," he said one evening as we worked late, "this project is going to change everything for you. Director level by 35? You'll set a company record." I smiled at the thought. "Yeah, well, long way to go still." "You'll get there," Ben said, his hand on my shoulder. "No one deserves it more." 2 days before my presentation, Ben called in sick. I texted to check if he needed anything, but his responses were uncharacteristically brief. I was too busy finalizing my presentation to give it much thought. The morning of my presentation, my phone rang. It was Diane from the executive floor. "Alex, Mr. Harrington would like to see you in his office." Immediately. Something in her tone made my stomach clench. I saved my presentation and headed to the elevator. CEO Richard Harrington's office occupied the entire northwest corner of the top floor. His assistant gestured for me to enter without making eye contact. Inside, Harrington wasn't alone. Director of Innovation Marcus Johnson was there, along with our head of legal, Jennifer Watts. And sitting in one of the leather chairs, looking simultaneously apologetic and triumphant, was Ben. "Alex," Harrington gestured to an empty chair. "Have a seat." I remained standing. "What's going on?" Harrington exchanged glances with Johnson before speaking. "We've been reviewing the optimization project. My presentation is at 2, I said. I can walk you through everything." "That won't be necessary," Johnson interrupted. "Ben has already provided us with a comprehensive overview." I looked at Ben, confusion giving way to a cold, creeping dread. "I don't understand." Harrington leaned forward. "Ben came to us yesterday with an enhanced version of your prototype. His implementation includes some critical improvements that honestly, pushed the project to a level we hadn't anticipated." "My project," I said quietly. "Alex," Ben finally spoke, his voice conciliatory. "I took your core concept and made some significant architectural changes. The foundations are similar, but the execution is different. You stole my work." The words felt hollow in my throat. "No one's accusing anyone of theft," Jennifer said smoothly. "The company owns all intellectual property developed by its employees." Harrington cleared his throat. "The board has reviewed both versions and feels Ben's implementation better serves our strategic goals. We've decided to fast-track his version and appoint him as project lead." The room seemed to tilt slightly. 3 years of work. Countless nights of sleep sacrificed. All of it, taken. "Alex," Ben said, "I hope you can be happy for me. This is a huge opportunity." I stared at the man I'd considered a brother. "You went behind my back." He had the decency to look uncomfortable, but only briefly. "I saw a way to improve the product. Isn't that what we're all here for? To make the best possible version of everything we create." "Ben will present to the board this afternoon," Johnson said. "We'd like you to transition all materials to him by end of day. You'll be reassigned to the customer analytics team effective Monday." A demotion. Not just my project stolen, but my position effectively reduced. I looked around the room at these people I'd trusted, finally settling on Ben. "Why?" Ben shrugged, his expression caught between sympathy and ambition. "Business is business, friend. You understand." I walked out without another word. The next few days passed in a blur. Ben's presentation was a resounding success. The board approved immediate implementation of his optimization system, with a substantial budget increase. He was featured in the company newsletter, with a quote about innovation through collaboration that made me physically ill. He made one attempt to talk to me in the break room. "Alex, I know you're upset, but this doesn't have to change anything between us." I looked at him, this stranger wearing my friend's face. "It already has. Look," he lowered his voice, "once this project launches, I'll have influence. I can bring you onto my team. We can work together, like we always talked about. Why would I trust you again?" His expression hardened slightly. "Because sometimes you have to be realistic. This is how business works. The best idea wins, not the first idea." It wasn't just the idea, Ben. It was my work. My code. My life for 3 years. "And now it's mine," he said simply. "You can either stay bitter or get on board." He walked away, leaving me clutching my coffee cup so tightly it nearly cracked. That night, I sat in my apartment staring at the wall until sunrise. By morning, something had crystallized within me. I wasn't going to accept this. I wasn't going to slink away to a lesser position while Ben built his career on my stolen work. I would get justice. But it would require patience. First, I needed information. I dedicated my evenings to understanding exactly what changes Ben had made to my system. I still had access to the development servers, an oversight in IT that I didn't rush to correct. What I discovered confirmed my suspicions. While Ben had indeed made some surface-level changes to the architecture, the core algorithms were unmistakably mine. He'd added layers of complexity that looked impressive in a presentation but would inevitably create vulnerabilities in real-world implementation. I documented everything meticulously, creating side-by-side comparisons that clearly demonstrated the lineage from my original code to his improved version. Next, I studied Ben himself. We'd been friends for 20 years, but now I was seeing him with new eyes. He'd always been charismatic, able to command attention in any room. But there was something else, a recklessness that extended beyond his professional life. I took a colleague from accounting to dinner. Karen had briefly dated Ben last year before an abrupt breakup. It was strange, she confided after her second glass of wine. Everything was great, then suddenly he ghosted me. A week later, I saw him with Melissa from legal. That doesn't sound like Ben, I said, feigning confusion. Karen laughed bitterly. Oh, it gets better. I found out he'd been seeing us both simultaneously for months. When I confronted him, he acted like I was overreacting. Said we'd never agreed to be exclusive. I nodded sympathetically while mentally adding another piece to the puzzle. Ben had always been comfortable with risk, and with deception. Over the next few weeks, I watched as Ben threw himself into his new role. He hired 2 additional developers, scheduled aggressive implementation timelines, and somehow convinced management to double the project budget. In team meetings, he spoke with absolute confidence about features that I knew would be nearly impossible to deliver on the promised schedule. He was overextending himself, driven by the need to prove he deserved his promotion. Perfect. Meanwhile, I performed my new duties in customer analytics with quiet competence. I arrived early, stayed late, and volunteered for additional responsibilities. My new director, impressed by my work ethic, began copying senior management on my analysis reports. I was rebuilding my reputation, brick by careful brick. 2 months after Ben's promotion, the first cracks in his facade began to appear. His team missed an implementation milestone. Nothing major, just a week's delay, but I noticed Johnson's frown during the status meeting. That night, I activated the next phase of my plan. Using my still active credentials, I accessed the project repository. Ben, overconfident as always, hadn't bothered to audit user access permissions. I didn't delete anything or make obvious changes. Instead, I introduced subtle inefficiencies into non-critical components, the kind that would only manifest under specific load conditions. The next milestone review went smoothly. Ben was back in Johnson's good graces, proudly demonstrating performance improvements that exceeded projections. But I knew what was coming. 3 weeks before launch, Harrington announced a major client demo. Axiom Industries, our largest potential customer, would be visiting to see the optimization system in action. It would be a controlled demonstration, of course, but with real-time data processing to showcase the capabilities. Ben was ecstatic. This was his moment to shine at the highest level. I waited until 2 days before the demo, when last-minute changes would be too risky to implement but early enough that basic testing wouldn't reveal the issues. Then I activated the dormant code I'd integrated weeks earlier. Under standard testing conditions, everything would function normally. But under the specific load parameters I knew would be used for the Axiom demo, critical components would fail in ways that would appear random and unrelated. The day of the demo arrived. I made sure to position myself in the back of the conference room, just another face in the crowd of employees gathered to witness our company's moment of triumph. Ben stood confidently at the front, his expression assuring as he welcomed the Axiom executives. "What you're about to see," he proclaimed, "is the future of data optimization." Everything started perfectly. The initial processing cycles showed impressive performance, exactly as expected. Ben was in his element, explaining complex concepts in accessible terms, highlighting the projected cost savings with compelling graphics. Then, precisely on schedule, the first anomaly appeared. A data stream stuttered, processing time spiking unexpectedly. Ben faltered for just a moment before smoothly offering an explanation about initial calibration adjustments. But I knew what was coming next. 3 minutes later, right in the middle of demonstrating the system's most impressive feature, multiple components began failing simultaneously. Error messages flooded the display screen. "This is unusual," Ben stammered, his confidence evaporating. "We haven't seen this in any of our testing." He frantically tried to isolate the failing components, but each fix seemed to trigger new problems. His team members looked on in horror, helpless to intervene in real time. Harrington stepped forward, attempting to salvage the situation. "Perhaps we should reschedule the full demonstration after our technical team has had a chance to." "Wait," the Axiom CTO interrupted. "These error patterns look familiar." He turned to Ben. "Is this system built on the Rothmannschian distributed processing framework?" Ben hesitated. "It incorporates elements of several established frameworks, yes." "Including Rothmannschian?" "Yes," Ben admitted. The CTO's eyes narrowed. "Did you compensate for the inherent latency issues in the RC framework when processing asymmetrical data loads?" Ben's silence was answer enough. "I thought not," the CTO said. "It's a common oversight. But critical in enterprise-level implementations." I bit my lip to hide my smile. I had specifically designed my original system to address that exact issue, something Ben would have known if he truly understood my code instead of merely appropriating it. The meeting dissolved into damage control. The Axiom executives departed with polite but cooled interest. Harrington's expression was thunderous. I slipped out quietly, but not before catching Johnson's eye. The director was watching me with a speculative expression. The next morning, I received a message to join Johnson in conference room C, alone. When I arrived, he was reviewing performance logs on his tablet. "Sit down, Alex," he said without looking up. I complied, my expression neutral. "Yesterday was a disaster," he said finally. "I heard. Unfortunate timing." Johnson set down his tablet and studied me. "The interesting thing is, when our team started analyzing what went wrong, they found some unusual code patterns. Fragments that don't match Ben's documented architecture." I said nothing. "But they do match something else," Johnson continued. "They match early prototypes from your original project. The ones you developed before Ben's improvements." I met his gaze steadily. "That is interesting. Alex," Johnson leaned forward, "did you sabotage yesterday's demonstration?" "I've been working in customer analytics for months," I said calmly. "I don't have access to the optimization project anymore." Johnson smiled thinly. "We both know that's not an answer." "What I know," I said, pulling a flash drive from my pocket, "is that I have documentation proving that Ben's innovative system is largely plagiarized from my work. Documentation I was planning to share with HR today." Johnson stared at the flash drive, then back at me. "That's a serious accusation. It's a serious offense." We sat in silence for a long moment. "The Axiom deal would have been worth millions," Johnson said finally. "My original design accounted for the Rothmannschian latency issues," I replied. "It would have worked flawlessly." Another long pause. "What do you want, Alex?" I slid a folder across the table. Inside was a comprehensive analysis of what had gone wrong with Ben's implementation, along with detailed corrections that would salvage the project. "My corrections. I want what's mine," I said simply. 2 days later, the executive team called an emergency meeting. Ben arrived looking haggard, clearly expecting a formal reprimand. Instead, he found himself facing a panel that included not just Nexus leadership but also 2 members of the board. Harrington opened with a blunt assessment of the Axiom failure, then revealed something that made Ben's face drain of color. A formal audit had uncovered evidence that his system contained substantial portions of proprietary code developed previously by another employee. Me. That's not, Ben started, but faltered when Harrington slid printouts toward him. Side-by-side comparisons that were unmistakable. Did you really think no one would notice? Harrington asked coldly. Ben's eyes found mine across the room. I saw the moment he understood. Fortunately, Harrington continued, Alex has agreed to resume leadership of the project. His original design addresses the critical flaws that were exposed during the Axiom demonstration. Ben stood abruptly. You can't just replace me. This is my project now. It never was, Johnson said quietly. And given the circumstances, you should be grateful we're not pursuing legal action for intellectual property theft. Alex? Ben's voice held a note of desperate betrayal. We've been friends for 20 years. I met his gaze. Business is business, friend. You understand. They escorted Ben from the building that afternoon. His company email was deactivated before he reached the lobby. By evening, his access badges had been demagnetized, his credentials purged from all systems. 1 week later, I presented the corrected optimization system to the board. It performed exactly as promised. Axiom signed a 3-year contract, with options to extend. I was officially promoted to Director of Innovation, with a substantial raise and stock options that would vest over 5 years. My office was relocated to the executive floor, the same office that had briefly been Ben's. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I think about our friendship, 2 decades of shared history erased in an instant of betrayal. I wonder if he ever truly understood what he destroyed, not just for me but for himself. I heard through mutual connections that Ben struggled to find work after Nexus. Word travels fast in our industry. No one wants to hire someone with a reputation for stealing colleagues' work. Last month, I received a LinkedIn request from him. His profile showed he'd moved to a small town in Maine, working for a local IT support company. A significant step down from his corporate ambitions. I considered accepting, perhaps even sending a message. Some part of me curious about what he might say after all this time. Instead, I clicked ignore. Some betrayals can't be forgiven, only avenged. And some lessons must be learned the hard way. I wonder, though, in my darker moments, did my victory make me just like him? Or was justice served? I still don't know the answer.